I want to give a brief overview of what Josh went over, highlighting some of the key skills that you want to make sure you master in order to be able to build books. And we'll start to transition into a little bit more of the advanced features that's connected to that. Many of the advanced features I'll be talking about may not be applicable for you. That's understandable. For example, if you're doing an art book, you may not care about how to make an equation. However, equations are quite critical for all physical sciences, so it's important in order to be able to at least comment about that capability. The same thing applies to other aspects. However, other things like the accessibility and the review checker and things like that is applicable for everyone, and I will comment on that as we actually evolve. So I want to make sure that everyone has the link to the construction guide. I pasted this several times in the past on the side. You can grab it right now. It looks like this. and we've addressed it before, but I didn't actually explicitly pull it up and start to dig through here. Josh went over a lot of the stuff that's in the basic editing or chapter 3 section of that. Chapter 4 deals with advanced editing, where you're able to target these things. I may talk about interactive elements depending upon time and available. And naturally, if you want to be able to look at remixing aspects or dissemination aspects or integration of learning management systems, that's what's also in the construction guide for here. In addition to complement the adapt users guide that I pasted in the conductor page for you in order to do. So again, like I mentioned, I want you to be able to create a empty page in order to work off of here. And that requires using the remixer to create the page. So I'm going to go to the project page. And yes, I have lots of projects. I'm going to click on Delmar special text. This was the text that I created yesterday. I can go to the textbook link here in order to look at the text. But more importantly, I want to just open up it in the remixer. So I'm going to open up in the remixer, take a moment for it to load. And it will look just like what the remixer should look like. On the right-hand side has the book. On the left-hand side has the library. I'm not going to care about the library because I want to use the remixer for reorganizing or creating a scaffold that involves multiple pages in order to expand what we want to do. So in that case here's the book. I'm going to make, I only wanted to make one thing. So Delmar's special chapter, which is chapter 3 because the auto number is set up. And then I'm going to create an empty page and Delmar's special page. Okay. I want everyone to have an empty page. So if you've already done this, then ignore what I'm doing. If you haven't done this, please make sure that you can do this right now. Again, following Martin's discussion, this is not created yet. I need to save to the server and save to the server again. It's a 2-step process. It will then go through here and it's basically making a chapter and a new page. I can click.
Delmar, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
When I'm clicking the plus sign to add a new page and nothing happens. I don't get pop up or
The
anything.
plus sign doesn't add a page, it just expands the page.
I'm sorry, I meant at the top where it's in the blue, where you have the symbol to add a new page.
You have to click somewhere where you're going to be adding the plus.
Oh, I gotcha. Okay.
Otherwise, it doesn't know where you want to add the page.
I see.
So,
yep, I got it. Cool. Thank you.
but that's a good comment that we can actually put in a modal in order to tell people about that in the next version of the remixer so that people don't have that concern. So thank you for bringing that up. Yes, Martin.
What was the button you used to create the chapter?
It's still a plus. A plus creates a page,
okay.
Whether it's a chapter, if it's a chapter at the top level, or it's a page below the top level, or if I want to be able to make a sub page or a sub page or a sub page, I can make any monstrosity I want here. I do not want to make any monstrosity, but I have the flexibility in order to do so.
It's just the number of times you hit the button.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, each time you basically, yeah. That's fine. You can see it and you can play around with it. And obviously at any point here, I can just delete and then manipulate in that way so that once it looks like what I want it to be, then I can save it. Yes, Kespro.
Yeah, mine isn't looking like that at all. Like I created a blank book and I went into the book and I clicked on the OER remixer and it's
Why don't you pull up the OER remixer in the conductor page, not on the book, on the side book? That was commented a few times earlier on. I think Roy mentioned this, and perhaps
I did. That's how I pulled it up.
Okay, can you take the screen? We can take a quick look of this. And if anyone else is having issues in terms of being able to create a page, please chime in. This should be relatively quick in order to address, and it's important because you can't move on to editing if you don't have a page in order to edit. So feel free to take the screen and let's take a quick look at that. Okay.
Okay, so I have my book that I have in the conductor.
Okay, so just
and
tools.
And then under more tools, I clicked OER remixer.
Okay.
It's also telling me that I'm not a verified instructor.
Oh,
now it's showing it. What?
Context, yeah.
Now it's showing the stuff that you were showing.
I'm not sure. I had a couple of people comment about this yesterday, and I'm not sure if there's an internet issue or something like that. If something doesn't look like it's supposed to, just press F5, refresh the screen, and most likely it will. Sometimes internet slow down and some issues are involved in order to be able to process that. So,
okay.
Anyone else have any questions, concerns? Everyone has an empty page to work off of.
I have a question. I was able to create a page, but I was not able to create a chapter. Similar question to what Martin was talking about. I tried to create chapter and it creates a page instead.
So anytime you press that button there, it creates a new page. Where it creates the page depends upon where my mouse happens to be. So if I click it at the top, it will make a chapter because the page that's made below the top is a chapter. If I happen to be clicking on the chapter, it will then make a page in that chapter. So the idea behind a chapter and a page, the remixer has no context behind that other than within the hierarchy that you created under the argument that the first page below a course is meant to be a chapter. But the page below a chapter is meant to be a page. However, you can do all deviations of that with units of chapters and subpages and things like that. But the conventional textbook is course, has chapters, chapters has assignments, and that's what works best with it. Wikipedia, that's the canonical version. If you start deviating from canonical version, the remixer will warn you about that, but won't stop you.
I got it. It's just called it new page, but it's actually chapter. I should pay attention to the symbol instead of the
symbol
words.
works, but you can also know that the top level here is always a chapter.
Okay, I got it. Yes, actually, I did create chapter. I just didn't realize it was chapter. It says new page, but it's actually a chapter. Okay, got it. Thank you.
Double click on it. It may not say chapter because I put that in the auto numbering thing, but you can see it right here under article type.
Got it. Yes, I see. Thank you.
Okay. There you go. Okay. Doesn't look like anyone else has their hand up, and I don't think there's anything in the chat. The chat keeps on disappearing every time I stop sharing, which is a beautiful aspect of Zoom. Okay, so I've already created the page, which is right here. I'm just going to double click on it and go to the page because this is a discussion around editing, not a discussion around the remix. So here's a blank canvas, a blank page for me to be able to edit. Now, I can edit by clicking the edit button. I can do Control E in order to edit the button, whichever one you have a preference for, and it pulls up this editor. The editor is a graphical user interface that sits on top of the actual code that really is the page. And the code that's really in the page is called HTML, Hypertext Markup Language. Now, I will show you what it looks like, but I'm not going to edit Hypertext Markup Language because that takes a lot of effort in order to be able to do. But the reason I want to mention this is that the real page is hypertext. The graphical interface that we use to the page is a simplified way in order to create the underlying HTML. The wiki part that I mentioned before, the fast parse, is making that editor small, meaning less options available. Even though you may be daunted by all the options that Josh mentioned, that's still a significantly small part of all the possible things that you can really do with HTML. So just keep that in mind for what we're doing. This editor is called CK Editor. CK Editor is the same editor that used to be used in Canvas. Canvas a year and a half ago or so decided to stop using CK Editor. Why? I'm not entirely sure, but I bet it's probably because CK Editor, while it's open source, also for the advanced features you have to pay for, and they probably just didn't want to pay money off of this because it's relatively easy to build a decent editor if you have a reasonable amount of money, and Canvas has a reasonable amount of money off of that. There are other editors out there than this editor, which again is called CK Editor. There's the editor that's used in Pressbooks, which is called, I think, Minitab. I think that's the term for it. I'm less familiar with it, but it's also quite popular as an open source editor. And there are a handful of other editors that are less popular than those two out there. But this is the one that we use, and it's actually pretty useful like that. And we've tweaked it a little bit from the native aspect. So with that, Mariana has a question.
Yes, the one. I have a question because one of my professors, she's doing a translation of a book in French to English, and she asked if you can have 2 pages, one beside the other. Because here in we always have 1 page, yes? Can you have 2 pages, one in English and one in French?
No, we don't.
At the same time.
We didn't build it in order to do something like that. That would be a very, I don't want to say it's esoteric, but no one has ever asked me that in 16 years. So we haven't had an interest in it. My recommendation is you can take your screen and expand it in this way. How do you do it? You do it this.
Yeah.
And there you have side by side.
The 2 books.
Yeah, you can open up one book here and open up the other book here and then do the translation.
Or chapters.
Or chapters. But I may mention, if you're doing a translation like that, one mechanism in order to go about doing that, and we can do that, is that we can take your book in French and submit it to our machine translation infrastructure in Amazon Cloud. It will take it, it can translate it back and create a copy of the book. Images, text, and everything, machine translated. Is it going to be perfect? No. But it'll have the same infrastructure. You'll have the text right there in English. And this that works if you're going from English to French, whatever. And then you can come in and modify it right there. It's going to be about 10 times faster and easier to do than trying to do a side-by-side translation off of that.
No.
And we can do that. I mean, it costs $20, but we can comp it for you in order to be able to put it together.
No. So thank you. So she has the translation. It's just she wants readers to be able to see both at the same time.
Oh, okay. So from a pedagogical perspective, not from an editing perspective.
Yes, exactly.
The answer still is we don't have that, but I can see the utility off of that in languages in general. One thing that we could do.
You have HTML. Perhaps you can do it in HTML.
We can do everything with HTML. It just is going to be fragile. So you have to make it in such a way that it's responsive and you're able to do the tweaks and things like that. And a better way might be using JavaScript so that you can actually, let's say you take text, you hover over it, and it pops up with the original translation or something, or the original text, and you're able to see it right there. That I think is a little bit more powerful. Requires a little bit of finesse in terms of linking content over on that. And it would be something I'd be interested in order to pursue. But it would be a winter-ish project for us. I can't move it in with our current to-do list.
No. I understand.
Yeah.
Just asking because she asked it. Thank you very much.
So feel free if that's something that you want to pursue to let us know, and then we can talk about that in more detail.
Okay.
We would probably make a conductor page, and that's where we have a conversation for any of these new features and things like that, so that people come in and have a role. If I hear that other language people want the same thing, because once they understand that they can do that, then they start asking for that, and then we may want to accelerate that development. So, okay.
Thank you very much.
Anyways, back to editing of content on the page. So again, CK editors right here. There's nothing on the page, which is not exciting. On the upper right-hand corner, you have a button that says HTML. That goes to the source page. And you'll be not surprised that there's nothing in the source page because there's nothing there. So I'm going to go back to the HTML or the GUI interface. And Josh went through a lot of different features, but there are typically about 4 to 5 primary things that you need to be able to do. So the first one is to be able to write text. And anywhere that you have a little cursor here, this is a sentence. You can write the text. And that's the GUI interface, and it's close to WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. So in other words, this is what students will see when they get to that. For those of you that remember word processors before WYSIWYG, you were basically writing markup language and then looking at the text after it was rendered. That's not too dissimilar about how we would do this if we were to go into the HTML. This is the HTML version of that sentence. It has a few additional things. This is a very simple thing. These are called paragraph blocks. Don't worry about the details. I will flip back and forth just to show you this, but you can actually edit in HTML. If you're powerful, everyone's powerful here, but if you are have a great desire in order to write in HTML, you can do that. And I've had a few authors that come in and they said they want to write in HTML. More power to them. I don't, but so anyways, we typically spend our time in the GUI interface. So number one is to create a sentence. You can modify the sentences here in the same way that you would expect to be able to modify this in Word or Google Doc using the same links that you'd expect here. It's the same power, and nothing overly surprising here. My recommendation is be conservative. Don't have things underlined, don't have things emphasized with italics or bold all over the place because it looks awful. And it also has issues for accessibility in order to be able to use. And the use of italics or emphasis in accessibility is actually quite an interesting conversation, but I'm not going to be able to discuss it given the time that we have, unless you guys want to discuss it in the reflections at the end of today's discussion. So anyways, there is one option on here that is so beautiful that I really want to emphasize beyond what Josh commented on, and that's the nuclear response. And the nuclear response is to remove all formatting. So let's say I make this sentence and I want to make that bold, I want to make that underline, I guess I made it italics, that underline, and I have a monstrosity of a sentence. This is right here. Imagine I made this big. What Word lacks is the ability to remove all formatting. Google Doc has it, and probably other things do, but Word does not, and that makes it annoying. So I can come in and highlight this, and this little button right here is the nuclear response, saying, I'm going to erase all the formatting, and that's it. Now, the way you do that in Word is, I'm going to do Control Z, so undoing this and bringing it back, is that you copy it. I did a Control C, and now I'm doing a Control Alt C, and I can paste it without formatting. This was commented in the chat. It has the same effect, but it's a little bit more clunkier. Well, a little bit clunkier in order to be able to copy, paste, and do it, but it can work. But that is my favorite thing. So when I bring in content from other sources, like Josh was mentioning, we bring it in from Word, you even bring it in from any website that you have permission to do. I want to make sure I emphasize that. That's openly licensed. And you paste it in there. It will come in with a lot of junk. If you don't believe me, let's check it out. Let's go to CNN, which is depressing to look at these days. And I'm going to steal this content. I'm going to do a Control C, and I'm going to paste it into my editor. And there it is. So it came in with some stuff. It's a little misaligned and things. It comes in with this HTML. Now, does this look like it's fun in order to play with? Absolutely not. This is lots of stuff that we don't care about. But if we come in, I'm going to do a Control Alt A for everything. I'm going to do the nuclear response. And we actually still have some junk, but we have a little bit less junk in order to be able to deal with and such. This is because of a lot of different things and links and such like that. It simplifies your life immensely if you're bringing things in from other sources. And that applies anywhere. If you're doing something from Word to Google Doc and you paste it in, it has the same garbage in there. Or Google Doc to Word, it has less garbage than Word for some reason or another, but it's still there. This gives you the ability to erase it. So anyways, I'm going to delete this because A, I don't want it, and B, if I were to save it, I would be in violation of their copyright, and the CNN police would be knocking at my door really quickly. So anyways, that right there is the first thing, is to be able to edit content. You have a few additional things here that you should have some comfort with before alignment, indexing, lists and things like that. There's no reason for me to go over it. Josh mentioned it briefly. There is an overview of that in the construction guide that gives you each arrow and a description behind these things if you have some concerns over these things. If you hover over them, it'll pop up with what's called a tooltip, a little snippet in order to tell you what these things mean. So Josh mentioned how to make a hyperlink, which looks like a chain link perspective, so you can make a link anywhere. I will mention this, and Josh mentioned this, but I'm going to really emphasize these things. If you make lots of hyperlinks, so one of the powers that one experiences with making an online resource, whether it's a textbook or a website, is the ability to link out to various spots in order to make it a very powerful infrastructure. So you can think of it as a library guide. When you go to a library guide, it's a lot of different links everywhere. Now, what's the primary issue associated with curating a set of links? Anyone want to take a guess for that?
Link rot.
Link rot.
Yeah.
So broken links. So as soon as you have links out there, the integrity of the page that you've created is based upon what you've created on that page and anything else that you link out to it. And we knew in the very beginning that we did not want to deal with link rot. We didn't want to be link farmers in order to protect and curate the links, because we felt that that was an obscene use of time. So that's one of the reasons why we did not pursue a referatory-based approach. We facilitated a repository, an integration into our system, so it's all internal, and therefore we don't have link rot unless we're the ones that are responsible for killing our own stuff. And we don't do that. So when a page is decommissioned, we move it into a special area that we call purgatory. You'll never see this, but it means that that page still exists. You can still provide a link that goes to it, but you're unable to find it directly and it doesn't get in your way. We do that in order to preserve the integrity of what's going on. So you can think of it as something along the lines of a little mini internet archive that preserves the pages that we have, so that the content that you create is maintained and integral. We also have one of our bots that's called a dead link bot, which does exactly what you want. So routinely we'll run a dead link bot through books in order to excise links that give 404s, which is the term for they don't exist. And that's part of the curation efforts that we do and we provide to for you guys. At any time that you request a book in order to be reviewed for that, we can actually process that. We probably may want to make that into a cron job, which means that it would happen every month or 2 months or something like that for the books in order to make sure that what you're doing. But that bot removes the link completely. It does not find where the link might go to and such. So anyways, I digress and such. It looks like Martin said that there is a toolbar button. I presume it's hidden somewhere because I've never found it. So I look forward in order to be able to check that out there. So, okay, anyways, text. So the other thing is images. Josh mentioned that before. Drag and drop is one of the easiest ways in order to talk about images. However, Josh also emphasized the idea of a figure. The difference between a figure and an image is just an image. A figure is an image plus a caption. And for accessibility purposes, it's nice to have a caption connected to that image. For just usability, irrespective of accessibility, it's nice to have a caption connected to that image, programmatically connected, not just text down below that may not be clear to people that's connected to that. And that's what a figure block is. And that's what you add when you pull in a figure, depending upon if it's a single figure or multiple blocks is connected to that. The other one is adding a table. I didn't quite catch Josh commenting on a table. Did he mention that?
So
What was that?
in passing, I'm sure.
Yes.
Okay. So the way we add tables is is very similar to the way we'd add tables on Word or Google Doc. You have this little widget and you say, I want a 4x5 table, and there you go. And you can add the things that on here. Now, since this topic is meant to discuss open editing, but also accessibility, we start introducing the concept that the more complicated structures that we are creating, and a table is a complicated structure, has the potential or has the requirement in order to handle accessibility for that. So before I talk about that, let's talk about what a table looks like in HTML. This is what a table looks like in HTML, which tells you that you have a table, you have a body of the table, you have a row of the table, you have entries in each of the row, you have another row, another row, another row. This is really what a table is. It's not this graphical interface. I emphasize this because these points and these entries off of here are particularly important for accessibility purposes. Does anyone know what accessibility issues that we have with tables?
You have to have it has to be able to read from left to right and top to bottom, and so you have to label it such that the reader knows to do that.
So you have the labels. So the direction of the reading doesn't come into tables. The screen readers are able to do it, but the labeling is important. And when we talk about labeling, we're not talking about captions. In fact, while we have a caption requirement, while it's a good idea to have captions connected to figures, and it's a good idea to have caption associated with tables, it's not actually an accessibility requirement for WCAG 2.1. I haven't looked at 3.0, but I don't think it's also different. But if you were to right-click on the table, you can see the table properties. That's the same thing if you were to right-click an image, and I'm sure I have an image on my screen somewhere. So let's say that we took this image right there. I can, so here's an image. I can do an image property, and I have those properties right here connected to the image. Not connected to the figure, but connected to the image of the figure. The newer version of CK Editor is a little bit more powerful, and we're thinking about changing it to give you a bit more control over figures versus images. But images give you the ability to add the alt text here via the properties, and the alt texts are important for every image that's not decorative. Let me describe this in a slightly different way. A decorative image is an image that carries no informational content. It is just pretty to look at. For example, all the thumbnails at the top of your book of every chapter is decorative. There's no reason in order to have an alt text for it because it carries no information to tell students that are visually impaired. So the way you deal with decorative images is you just have no alt text. It generates an empty space in the HTML code, and the accessibility purposes, this is designated as a decorative, and students, the visually impaired students, don't have to hear things like this is a decorative image because that doesn't carry any weight for them. Anyways, I digress on that. That's the biggest issue associated with accessibility for image. But I will comment on here that there are other aspects associated with alt text. It is best practices in order to make the alt text less than 250 characters. So you can think of it as a tweet. Now, some images, you can write a description of that image in a tweet. I don't want to call it an X or whatever they want me to call it. It makes no sense. But 250 characters. Many images, especially for the STEM fields, you cannot put the nature and the interpretation of that image in 250 or 240 characters that's out there. That's perfectly fine. A limitation, because you can also provide context behind the image in the sentence, in the paragraph that explains what that image is meant to do. So it's inline contextual description. And that is oftentimes people's recommendation of how all images should be done. But if anyone has taken a biochemistry course, for example, where you have a big cycle and you have 20 different images all cycle on there, and it's just essentially impossible. You have to write a whole page in order to talk about all those descriptions there. That would be what's referred to as a long description. Now, long descriptions technically exist in HTML. If you do a Google search on long descriptions, they'll tell you about how to go about doing it. Ignore it. It's out of fashion, and accessibility readers do not recognize it and spit that out. So if you have to do a long description, there are other approaches in order to do that. One is to put a long description on a separate page and hyperlink to it, which is perfectly fine in order to do. I think that there are other tricks that we can do that are a little bit more powerful in order to be able to facilitate that. But I did want to mention this aspect in terms of dealing with alt text as an accessibility issue. Why? That's the #1 problem for accessibility. Excuse me. For individuals creating accessible content is lack of an alt text. So let me delete that. So the #1 issue with tables is lack of headings. And a heading basically tells students that of this table, that the top level might be cat 1, cat 2, name, cat 3, cat 1, whatever, color, cat, I don't know, prettiness, whatever. And then you want to say the data that's actually here, which is not going to be 1, it might be color, green, whatever, or so. So you get the concept behind here. If this is set up the way it is right now, screen readers do not tell students that they're able to interpret this as a label at the top of this table. As is, it requires some sort of labeling. The formal term for that is heading or header, as a way in order to describe that. And how do you go about doing that? How do I make this table so the top row is designated as a heading? Well, if I do the right click and I go to table properties, just like I did for the image, it comes with the table properties, and I can just say first row is a heading. It colors it in a slightly different color. We can change the style here in the guide in various ways. So if this is not your preference for the way you want your table to behave, we can change that using more advanced features that are not important for our conversation. And now students would be able to understand that 1 is connected to this heading that might be the owner of the cat, or the name, or the color, and they can recognize that, and screen readers recognize that. If you go to the HTML, you can see that this has a little bit different form, if you actually recognize it, saying that this is now a heading row, and then it has a designation here, and screen readers are able to handle that. That is the second biggest issue associated with making accessible online content. How many other issues are there that you need to address? There are 81 criteria that my accessibility person uses in order to evaluate a resource or a page. 1/3 of those are easy in order to evaluate by normal humans, that is by us that don't have training in accessibility, and those are you can find that in the construction guide, in the construction page under accessibility, where you can see all these criteria right here. And I encourage you to take a look at that if you want to see what you need at the minimum in order to be accessible. Okay, is this a lot? Yes, being accessible is hard. Okay, were there?
Can the row and the column both be header?
Yes. So if you actually looked at that, and I go to table properties, I can click the first column and unclick the first row. I'm going to click both of them, and now this and this are indicated like that. This gets a little bit uglier, so you'll want to change the style, and we'll give you a list of styles in order to change into a different way in order to be able to indicate this. This comes into a key aspect associated with accessibility. There is accessibility. When you're writing these things, there is aesthetics and there's programmatic meaning. Aesthetics is, does it look pretty? Which we all want our content to be pretty, engaging, want to get involved in it, okay? But the stuff in the background is what tells screen readers how to interpret it. And those two can be coupled or completely decoupled. In other words, I can make a CSS that will get rid of these colors and have other things that make this a little bit prettier with lines and various things like that. Something similar to what Roy did using LaTeX, although LaTeX has some serious accessibility issues on websites. It's a different issue. But Behind the scenes, these indications here in these scopes as indicated tell screen readers how to interpret it programmatically. So keep that in mind as you start to be able to deal with these things. Is just because you choose something because it's aesthetically pretty does not mean it has the programmatic meaning underlying it. The example I like to give is all these boxes that Josh went over that you have available that you could put these little asides onto it. So you can make an example box, which has this thing here, or you can make an interactive box, or you can make a theorem box. And you'll see that these have different colors and different styles. And you may be inclined to say, I don't like the theorem boxes. I want to make all my boxes like this. And even if we put theorems in it. The problem is that there's programmatic meaning behind these boxes, not just aesthetic meaning. And if you want to change the way things are presented, you need to tweak things in a different way. So the upshot off of all this is that accessibility can be hard, takes a long time in order to master. And I just want to be able to go through some of the features behind it. And I want to transition into our auto checker in a moment off here. So this gives you the ability to make boxes, make images. You can add the meta tags, specifically the alt text to the image. You can add the headings to the table in order to make it accessible and such. Now, the other thing I want to mention and reinforce this, you may remember when we were talking about adapt, I was commenting that it wasn't important for everything in adapt to be accessible as long as you have an alternative in place in order to be able to facilitate that. So in other words, the rules that sometimes accessibility people, experts on campuses tell other faculty to do is not always necessarily what you need to do. And that's just a function of training and other things that are connected to that. The same thing applies here. So for those of you that have some familiarity with accessibility of these things, when you make content off of here, you can make a title for that page. So let's say I want to say topic 1, how I learned to love the bomb. Okay. Now, if we were doing this in Word in the old days of like 2 decades ago, we'd come in and we'd make this bold, and that would tell students that this is a new entry. Or we come in and we make it bigger by choosing the font size to something bigger like that. And that would be how we deal with it. But that's an aesthetic issue. This right here is not a programmatic issue. Does anyone know what I should be doing right for accessibility purposes?
Changing it to a heading under where
Precise.
I assume where it says normal instead of.
Exactly right. You can change to a heading that's connected to here. So if I come into a heading 2, now this programmatically tells students that this is the start of a new section, not just the aesthetics. Why do we not rely on aesthetics? Because if you can't see, aesthetics don't mean jack. You need some way in order to indicate that. So how do we go about doing? Yeah, I have some aesthetics connected to H2. But if you go to HTML, it says it's an H2 right here instead of a paragraph block right here. That's the programmatic understanding of things. So it's that dual concept of writing for aesthetics, but making sure you also write for programmatic understanding that's required in order to make accessible content. Now I want to get into what headings mean and why these boxes are written in the way they are in order to handle accessibility. So the argument that we have here is that you have headings in order to be able to designate this. H2 is this level. Then the typical thing is H3 is below it, and it's meant in order to have hierarchies that's in place. So let's say I have a subsection here. I can make that H3. I made it a little bit smaller text in order to distinguish it. Sometimes we'll have a number in front of it. So we can say this is 1, and then we'll say 1.1. That's perfectly fine. There are no issues for accessibility for that. In fact, this is actually just good practice, a good procedure in order to be able to do this. Hold on, Mohammed. Let me take a breath in a moment. So that is good for accessibility purposes. Does anyone know why we don't have a heading 1?
Page
Chapter,
name.
chapter
The
heading.
title.
The title. There's only one heading 1 on a page, and that is the title. That's an accessibility requirement. You should never have another heading 1 anywhere. We don't add it via the GUI interface. Can you add it via the hypertext markup language? Yeah, you can do anything you want. Doesn't mean it's going to be accessible. So keep that in mind. Now, the typical argument is H1 here, the next one is H2, the next one below is H3. If the next one below here could be heading 2, that would be perfectly appropriate. So I basically come back up in order to be able to do that. Some accessibility people like to argue that you need to be sequential in the way you operate. So in other words, you can't have a heading 3, for example, which is this one right here, before a heading 2. Now, you certainly can't put a heading 2 below a heading. Let me phrase that. You can't do something like this. Here. I can't take this thing and then intend on doing this like that, where I intended this to be below here, but this is heading 2 and this is heading 2 and this is heading 3, because I'm screwing up the way the order is. So the intent that people like to argue is you want to be sequential in the way you process these things. Now, that's actually not necessary for accessibility purposes. It's good practice. We deviate that for one reason, and that is for these blocks. So these blocks are designed not just for aesthetics, but for programmatic meaning. This heading, this block here, this title has a heading. That heading is an H5. I can add a heading in here like solution, and then I make that an H6. Now, why do I do this? Is that if I wanted to follow a sequential process, if I use this box up here and I put it right there, and I want to be sequential, this heading here would have to be an H3. But if I used it right here, then it would be an H4. So the nature of this box and the underlying code would have to change depending upon where I used it on the page. Are you guys with me on this concept here? If you're not, it's not overly important, other than emphasizing that there's a very specific heading designated to these boxes, and they are perfectly legal, quote unquote, in accessibility terms. It's part of our user guide, and it says that the headings are always an H5, and if you have a section inside the box, it's an H6, period, irrespective of where it happens to be. Some accessibility people have problems with that. They are wrong. So that was the topic of headings. They're important and critical for you. You may have recognized in making PowerPoint files nowadays, PowerPoint likes to tell you about how to do headings and try to guide you in order to make headings on PowerPoint files because it's useful for accessibility purposes. It's good practice across the board. So, images, tables, text, and a little bit of accessibility connected to that. So, let's talk about the accessibility checker. This little Da Vinci man on the far right of your checker is the accessibility checker. If you click this on, it will identify the top issues that authors typically have with accessibility on their pages. It's not all by any stretch of imagination. Remember, I said there are 81 criteria that my accessibility person uses in order to be able to do these, but these are the biggest ones that are involved in this. So when we have students review other faculty's books for accessibility, oftentimes from students from the Student Disability Center on my department, my campus that is, they use this as the initial guide in order to check to see what's right. So you can see, I can click all of them, or I can click any of them down here. I can do a check just on headings. So the whole conversation I had for the last 10 minutes, it will evaluate. It will check to see, do you have alt text pulled in? Are your tables have a heading connected to it? Are your links good. I'll tell you in a moment. Are your color contrast set up? This was a question that came up when we started. How are labels set up and how are abbreviations set up? And those are a little bit more details. And like I said, there are many, many more things connected to that. So Neil asked a question, where does this come from? Let me cancel this. It's that little Da Vinci man at the end. Vitruvius man? I always forget what the formal term is for that. But that you get right there in the editor. That is something that we built into this editor. It doesn't come natively in the CK editor, and you won't find this anywhere else in the OER landscape, at least not native. This provides authors the opportunity in order to test their content real time at the point of editing. This complements our accessibility bot that goes through content that's already been saved in order to check for accessibility and tweak and do various things. And the combination of the two is important in order to be able to make good accessible content. But at least the bot itself is reflective of our general philosophy of curation of the content, that we are preserving not just a repository, but we are a curatatory. We care about making sure that the content is up to snuff. And this is going to be especially important as accessibility requirements start to change and technology evolves in the accessibility landscape, and it's changing all the time, just like it is everywhere else. So anyways, okay, so this is not much text on here, but we can take a look and see what accessibility does on this page. I'm going to do all accessibilities by default. I'm going to press OK, and it will pop up with this little window, and it will tell you a little bit of an, it'll highlight the section off of here, and it'll give you an issue here. Data tables should not contain a caption element if not described anywhere else. So this is a caption, which is essentially a figure caption that you would have here. This is a table. I love tables. So this provides an opportunity in order to use the checker to co-write and check issues off of here. So I'm just going to do a quick fix, and it's going to add a table caption to here, and that's that. Could I do that manually? Yes. I can come in and I can right-click on table properties, and I'll see the caption right here. If you want to write a summary, that's also fine, which is sort of something like an alt text for this page, but it's not required, and screen readers, to my knowledge, skip over that block, so it's not really useful like alt text are useful. So Martin asked, must a caption be visible? Not technically. So keep in mind that the caption itself is really not an accessibility issue. We added it in here because we feel it's actually a good aspect. You don't need to accept that change at any point. I could have skipped that. It came up from the editor and it wouldn't push us in. I can introduce CSS, which is probably a little bit beyond what you want to do. And I can hide that caption if I want to be able to do that. I cannot hide that caption using the GUI interface because the GUI interface is a reduced instruction set. I shouldn't use that term because that's connected to programming, but it's a reduced set of tools available for you to be able to edit. Okay, I could save this. It gets saved to my database, and then I can pull it up and everything is fine. And there you go. So before I continue with the topic of advanced editing and accessibility, I want to emphasize the revision capability. And you may remember me talking about this yesterday. Every single save to our database is saved in perpetuity. So if you edit this page 30 times and save it 30 times, we have all 30 saves right there. So if you do something on this page and you save it and you delete something accidentally, or something is missing, or the cat jumped on your computer and made some junk, you don't have to fret. You can go back to a previous version, or what we call a revision of that page, and you can then pull that back up and make it work. And this is exceedingly powerful for anyone who's ever remembered the old days when we didn't have autosave in place and something happened, and it happened like in a classroom, and then you heard a student scream because all their coding disappeared or all their text disappeared. If you've never had that experience, congratulations. So how do I access the various versions of these things? Well, I can access it under the black bar of that page under options. Okay? And that right there is the revision history. I can click on that and it will pull up the revision history for that page. Now, since this page has only existed for 45 minutes, there's not much done here. Now, if I go to some of the pages that have been around on our platform for the last 10 years plus, we can have 200 to 300 revisions connected to that. Does it clog up our database? Yes. But is it a good idea? Yes. And we are committed in order to be able to do that. We have the same system on Adapt for the same reason. So anyways, I could find out that I saved something here where I added an image, I added a thumbnail, I created this. Actually, I did all these things simultaneously. I can look at what the version of this page at 11:24 a.m. And this is pulling up that page entry, and it looked like this, which was not terribly impressive, but that was the version of the page. Then this right here is the version that I just saved. That's there. I have the ability in order to look at two versions and compare, which may be useful in order to see what did someone do. In this case here, everything is green, which means I added everything here. I can do a side by side or just do the version off of here. So when the time comes that you need to do a reversion to a previous save, you have the ability to do that, and you'll explore this and recognize that this is the case. And you can say, I want to revert back to the 11 o'clock a.m. version of that, which basically means I want to revert back to nothing. We do reversions all the time because especially when we used to be an open platform where anyone can get an account and start editing anything on our platform, something similar to how Wikipedia operates. And then we had lots of people come in and make lots of mistakes, lots of edits, or start to hijack our pages in order to add erectile dysfunction drugs or use our pages in order to store Bollywood films or things like that. And we did lots and lots of reversions in order to be able to facilitate that. Anyways, I'm going to kill that because I don't want to do that. I just want to emphasize this aspect to you guys. So feel comfortable editing. You can always go back. So don't feel afraid to save. I'm not sure if that should be written on a button that I carry around, but it's actually a useful mantra when you're actually editing. Don't feel, if you have issues with what you're doing and something is all screwed up, just don't save it or do a reversion that's connected to it. So anyways, where are we here? Yeah. Let me go to my page. I'm going to delete these things. And here's my page, and there you go. Now, at this point, if I had a bit more time, I would pull up someone else's page and then run that checker on it. But I want to discuss a few of the more advanced things that our editor provides you than just being able to do accessibility checks. So I encourage you in the breakout room to take a page that has lots of content and use that accessibility checker. It is your friend. Okay, so let's transition in the last 10 minutes to some of these more advanced things that we put into here. So as it's probably become clear to you, if the LibreVerse is new, is that the LibreVerse as a whole is multifaceted, has a lot of power, a lot of potential, and takes a long time in order to master. Why? Because it has a lot of power and a lot of potential, and it's connected to that. We try in order to make it so that the utility of one component of our platform can augment the other parts of our platform, because that's just smart way in order to do things, that they're not independently operating. In other words, the homework system can be connected to the textbook. And one way to do that is to embed questions from the homework system into the textbook pages. Or other things that you may want to bring in that's more engaging and more active than what text, an image, and a title, a table might happen to be. So let's look at that. I'm going to open up the page again. I type edit. You can go into these things and take a look at these other options at your leisure. The things I want to talk about are these way over here. This button right here is our Jupyter system. So Jupyter is one of the major components of the LibreVerse. Jupyter lets us embed executable code. So let me pull up, this keeps on saving, I haven't, let me pull up my quantum mechanics book. So I'm going to assume that you guys don't want me to go into the basis of quantum mechanics, but if you do, then we can certainly go about into that because I love quantum mechanics. However, I'm forgetting what my, here we are. So here we go. So I'm going to go into this book, my version of this book. Other people have different versions of the book that we created. That's the whole point in my system. I'm going to go to the textbook, and I'm going to pull up. Actually, I know where it's at. And I want to show you what Jupyter Notebook looks like when it's embedded into a page. So the point of Jupyter Notebook is the ability in order to embed executable code into our page. Now, you can use the Jupyter Notebook directly, the Jupyter Hub directly, our platform, and many people do. But I was particularly interested in the connection between Jupyter and its computational capabilities and the ability in order to embed those computational capabilities into my book so that my book becomes more engaging and not just as a separate tool in order to be able to facilitate my pedagogy. So this right here is a book. Each block in here is Python code. If you don't know what Python code is, it's basically a scientific coding platform. It's not necessarily scientific, mostly scientific, that gives you the ability in order to run various things and get scientific output. So it's embedded into my book. At any point that I want to be able to activate it, I can run the kernel. It takes about 20 seconds in order to be able to do this. This right here is not minor code. This is not just a little JavaScript entry that we put in the page. This is a massive infrastructure that's connected to the book and separate. Each one of these things is meant to be run individually in order to be able to make this thing work. And what really matters, this is just teaching what each of these things mean to people, to students, because coding is important. But what I care about is this page right here, this block right here. This block is meant for teaching what's called particle in the box. Don't worry about the details behind it because I don't think Frank would like me to talk about it in more detail. But each of these things is meant in order to be able to describe these things. So for example, I can type in widgets onto here and it will plot this thing up. And it's running this code. So I can come in as an instructor or as a student, and I can change that code to 45 here. And then I can see what it looks like. So you can already see that if I were teaching computation or programming, this is a useful mechanism in order to tweak and see what happens. And it sees it real time right in the page instead of going to a separate server in order to be able to do it. So you can come in and use this as a notebook or Jupyter Notebook, but it's really a page that's used in a notebook manner. But this is an example of executable code in order to make this page engaging. And again, going to the theme that I've tried to emphasize during this week, the more engaged students are with the material, the more likely they're going to learn from the material. Now, this may not be your ball of wax, but the whole point is the ability to take stuff that's not traditional text, image, table stuff, but something that's actually far more interesting that can come in. And what type of stuff can come in? A range of different things, depending upon your field, different visualizations. If you want to visualize a molecule and rotate a molecule three-dimensionally, you can go about doing that. You want to do that with a protein. You want to look at a dynamic interface that you can look at gels if you're doing electrophoresis. If you are want widgets for economics in order to look at supply curves or supply and demand things, and you're switching and you're doing all those widgets that's connected to that. Essentially, any field has the ability to augment your book to make what I refer to as the textbook of the future, which is a textbook of technology. It's a textbook of engagement. It's a textbook that is far more powerful than just what this physical book might be able to provide to students. And that is the true power of what OER comes to you guys. Not just the freedom and the customization, but from my perspective, the ability in order to go far beyond our current state of education. Okay, let me get off my soapbox, and I just wanted to be able to emphasize this example. The way that you add this code, for those of you that have an interest in order to do so, is you click on here and you basically paste the code in the language that you want to use. Right now, we've embedded only 5 different languages on here, but the Jupyter Notebook system has 30 different languages. Most of those languages I've never heard of before. That's fine. And you can embed it. I don't have any code to paste in here that's particularly interesting, so I can just paste in hello world, and that's not an overly exciting block that we have in there. The next one over has these 2 arrows. These 2 arrows should look familiar to you because that's the logo or the that we used in order to designate adapt. So if you have an adapt course that you've created, for example, the first 2 days of this workshop, which means you have an assignment and you have questions in the assignment and you want students to do that, you can come in here and paste that assignment right here, and it will embed it into the book. So I need to first go to an assignment in order to show you this, because I can't randomly grab an assignment because I don't know what numbers are connected to it. So I'm going to grab, do not press this button. I'm going to grab one of my questions, for example, this demo book, and I'm going to grab this question, assignment and question ID, go back to, where was I? Go back to here, paste this in, and now it's pasted this into this page. Now, it's not fully WYSIWYG. You don't see it here, but if you were to save it, and you have to be signed in, and because I'm signed in, I can see this, but if I'm not signed in, I'm not. And here's the question. Now, because I'm signed in, it has this other stuff here. Students, when they come in, they just see the question. So you see a little bit of the interface behind how the question looks in, and this can be embedded into your book. If you do this summatively, students need to sign in order to submit, so it becomes a homework aspect. If you keep it formative, then it's engaging, and every student can type in a number and get the answer, and they're ready to rock. Subject to the issues that we discussed in terms of making things accessible, not accessible, but formative in the conversation that we had earlier this week on ADAPT. So that's one aspect to make a more engaging textbook. Anything you can do to make a textbook more engaging is almost always a good thing. So let's take a look at what else we have on here. So we have Jupyter, we have insert code. This right here is query. This is basically our term of using questions formatively. I want to fold this into adapt and ignore that. So please not discuss that, because I'm going to probably get rid of that in the next few months anyways. Now, what else can we do? Well, we have created a collated list of interactives that we feel are useful. We put them under learning objects, and you can go to interactive applications. And this just happens to be in chemistry. So I'm going to grab a PhET simulation. Now, this shows you an example of embedding a simulation, an executable simulation, into a page. This is a PhET simulation. How many other places have these sort of simulations? Thousands and thousands of places have simulations that you can use. Many are not openly licensed, but many are. PhET is, coming from the University of Colorado. So here's the content that you have here. You can embed this into your book. One way in order to go about doing that is, if you want to look at the source of the book, well, you can do something. You could copy it into your page, into your book, and then look at the source of the page. And all you need to do is then copy this text, and it has to be done at HTML level. So things get a little bit more complicated in order to be able to put this in. Alternatively, you could transclude this page that we of this corpus, this little mini repository, and transclude this page into your page. Now, we talked about taking transclusion and converting it to normal text, forking. I want to actually do something different. I want to actually transclude part of the page. Now, this is normally an advanced feature, so if this doesn't jive with you, that's perfectly fine. And this is what I want to do, is under elements, I can use content reuse. Content reuse gives me the ability, in order to take any other page and embed it into my page. Now, that can be a mess. But in this case here, it's not, because I can copy this page into article reuse and insert and save it here. And now I've grabbed this other, here we go, this other entry right there. So the page becomes sort of spaghetti in the sense that the content of the page comes from some other content. Now, this is more advanced. For most of you, you're not going to be doing this, so that's why I wanted to just put this at the end. But I want to emphasize that if you made a whole lot of visualizations or a whole lot of interactives, you can make a little mini repository and then use them at different spots. And then if you update it on this page, it will then be automatically updated on all the places that you use that page. And the same reason why we do this at the whole page level when we remix and things. So at this point, I want to stop here with these features. The goal that we're going to be doing after lunch is going into breakout room and start creating things. I'll bounce around here. Is it going to be confusing? Yes. If you haven't been comfortable with these sort of things, that's understandable. But it doesn't take long in order to get mastery of the basics, in order to be able to move things forward. And the more advanced things are available if that's something you want to be able to do. So before I address Martin, Mohammed, I shot down about 10 minutes ago, so I'd like to make sure I address his concern.
I just wanted to know that when we insert a box, say interactive box or some other definition, is it okay to change the title that is auto-generated there?
Yes. Yeah. That will be an aesthetic perspective. It will still have the same label that says that this is an exercise box. So you don't want to take an exercise box and use it as an example. Or you don't want to take a definition box and use it as an exercise box, because there's coding behind the scenes that tells screen readers this is a box and is an exercise box. And the students will then know that that's what it is. It's called an aside. That's the technical term in, or a container in terms of HTML coding. But you have the ability in order to do that. It could be a little finicky in order to do this because it doesn't have the full flexibility because the complex behavior behind that. But we're working on ways in order to be able to make that more robust. This is similar to a question that came up to Josh in terms of being able to drag these boxes and moving them around, which we currently don't have the features for doing that. But that is not rocket science. That can be expanded with appropriate effort and time and money. So yes, Martin.
Yeah, so the whole avoiding turning your book into a spaghetti by inserting a page from another page is the fact that this interactive tool that you have here was the only item on a page.
Yeah, so I do that. It's still spaghetti. That has nothing to do with the content that you bring in. And when I use the spaghetti doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. I actually enjoy spaghetti quite a lot. I ate it a lot in college. But it's yeah, you can make anything. You can make little snippets and things in different spots like that. This can be abused and used in a variety of different ways beyond what we want to do. But I may want to mention, what do you think would happen if I actually clicked the fork button on this page?
It'll explode.
No. What happens when you fork a page that's created by the remixer that's transcluded? We can get a lifeline. You don't have to be the one addressing this, Martin. Creates a copy, right? And so it takes what was transcluded and embeds that text so it's native in the page. Now, we did that when it was a single page that you brought in, single entry on a page that brought in here. This is a little bit more complicated because this is a block with some text above it and text below it. But it does the same thing, right? If I come in and this is the content, and there's a little block that says content reuse, it gives the link to tell where it's at, and that's fine. If I want to remove the spaghetti, say linearize the spaghetti, if you wanted to say it that, I can come in and I could fork it. And it does exactly the same thing that we did before. So first thing, you recognize that it doesn't look any different. But it is different because now that entry is manually added into here. It's no longer coupled to the repository that you created. Obviously, it has the issue that if you were to edit the original content, that the original code here, it's not going to be reflected on your page because it's forked. But This gives you the ability in order to remove the spaghetti if that's an issue for you. So my recommendation is if you control the little mini repository that you've built in order to bring things together, it's not too big of an issue in order to be able to have that in place. As long as everything is used on our platform, it's perfectly fine. It's people who take things off of platforms and move things around and make that work and such. So, yes. Was it Tara? I can't remember your first name. Was it Tara? Was that right?
Haha, okay.
Aha.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Haha, T-A-H-A.
T-A-H-A.
Yeah. So I saw you like showing a lot of things very quickly here. I got lost, even though I'm familiar with a lot of stuff here, I got lost. Are we going to have some time kind of pulling in?
The entire breakout room, the 2 hours from 1:10 to 3:10 or 3 o'clock is dedicated to editing. I will bounce around a little bit and you can talk to other people. You can commiserate a little bit and get over the barrier that you're experiencing. Everyone gets exposed to this barrier the first time they deal with editing of these things in this way. Like I said before, you don't need to master everything that I mentioned. In fact, you're probably not going to master or not going to need it. The key point is to get what you need to begin with and then start to expand as you learn about what other things that you can do. Because it's daunting in order to say, here's everything you have available when you're editing, which is already more than any other platform that's out there, in addition to the fact that you have the other parts of the LibreVerse to make that even more powerful, which gets more daunting. It's understandable that you need a little bit more.
The problem is, like in my case, I'm looking for the candy here you are showing. I'm looking how to add these animations and stuff like that. And so that's the one where you went quite fast.
Okay, so since you are advanced, because you're familiar with JavaScript and other things like that, if you want to add that under formatting, you have the ability in order to, what is that here? Style. You can add JavaScript directly to here. I know that you're comfortable with it, and that can actually be executable code. If you have JavaScript that you want to add, you can run it onto our servers to host it and then bring it over. And a few other things that's connected to it. That's a bit more advanced. Hopefully that addresses your concerns. If not, we can take a look at that after lunch in order to go into the more advanced things that you're talking about there that I did not discuss.
Thank you.
Wendy had a question, and then we can go here. So Nadia is a little bit higher up. If I've curated text and discover an accessibility issue, can I make that change? If you have editing rights on the page, of course you can. If you have content on a page that you feel requires accessibility, because there are lots of people who have not made content accessible, we bring in content from things from Pressbooks and other places that are atrocious accessibility issues, and we try our best to clean it up. But we put it out there because it's beneficial for other people to have access to, and then they can clean up steadily in order to be able to move forward. It's part of our open editing or open construction philosophy in order to be able to do it. So if you find a page that you feel has issues, please let us know, and we can work on updating that directly. And obviously, if you have it transcoded into your page, and you're going to have to fork it if you want to have editing rights on the actual source material. Yes. Okay, from the case lost, Wendy, do you still have a question, Wendy, or did you want to discuss this in a breakout room?
Yeah, so I won't be able to stay for the breakout room time. I'm on the East Coast, but I was just feeling like after watching all these editing things, they're wonderful, but I'm very confused about how to even begin the process. I get the idea that I'm going to a remixer, but there was some other terminology of platform thrown around in the chat the other day for which I took screenshots, and it was saying that I have to, after I build that I had to go to some other places, sync the book, use the workbench to editor, but I'm just kind of stuck on how do I even get to the point where I'm okay to start editing.
Okay, so I think this is a bigger answer in order to address, because I have to go back to what the remixer does in terms of handling pages and construct the new page and then go through the editing process. Can you email me directly, and then we can talk about actually just bringing you in. I will mention that we have office hours from 9 to 10 o'clock Pacific time. So from noon to 1 o'clock Tuesdays and Thursdays, that you can always come in if you have questions about anything that's associated with your use of the LibreVerse, and then we can address them off of that. But we're happy in order to be able to take a closer look with the issues that you have that will require a bit more time than we have to address right now. And that's part of what the breakout room meant, is to kind of dance around and fill in the little holes that we have in terms of moving forward. So
All right,
hopefully
thank
have our
you.
email. Okay, so it is now 12:12. So let's come back at the same time that we came back the last few days at 1:15 Pacific time, which is 4:15 Eastern time. And then we're going to move forward. The key thing is that you need to create a page that you can start to edit, and then we can start talking about adding these pages and adding things and talk about what you want to do, or to start editing other pages that you have on your book if you feel that that is the starting point that you want to be able to. Both are perfectly fine. So with that, I'll stop recording